Hello, everyone. It's Friday, October 2nd, 2020. Welcome to fourth quarter. And because it's another Friday, it's another Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar. I'm Jeannie Walters. It's great to see you guys. And as you join us today, please let us know where you're joining us from. We always love to hear from you from all over the world, so let us know that. And also, I'm curious about your first job. What was your first job as you decided that it was time to earn money for yourself? I will tell you that I started off as a babysitter, and then I ended up actually working in the community nonprofit organization that matched babysitters with families, which was kind of great because then I could get all the plum babysitting jobs too. So it worked out well. But that was where I started, and I'm curious, what was the very first job you ever had? That's always a fun thing to find out. So as you come in, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeannie Walters. I have been in the customer experience space for about 20 years now, and I'm always available to, hear from you in all the different ways that we connect in 2020. So LinkedIn, Twitter, all those great things. You can find me on those platforms. And like you, I'm spending a lot of time doing this in a virtual conversation. And so in 2019 and before that, I was doing a lot of keynote speaking on stages around the world. And after March 1st, I have been grounded here in Chicago, but that has not stopped me from providing keynotes virtually for clients. So we're developing some fun new topics like the 4 C's of a customer experience culture, which you may have read about in the blog, as well as defining SMIRC goals, which is our fun acronym for that. So if you are looking for a keynote speaker or you just need somebody to step in and help you motivate, please keep me in mind for that. But it's been really fun to connect with people from all over the world. And as always, we have our director of marketing, David, with us today. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello. And wouldn't you know it, my first job was actually as a dishwasher
Ooh.
at a restaurant. And I didn't realize that dishwashers were supposed to get some sort of waterproof apron. And so I just used a normal apron. And when I left work after the first day, my shoes were full of water, and everybody just looked at me like, who is this guy? Doesn't he, why didn't he use the right apron? So it
Uh,
was, I think we all start from square one and everything is
yep,
learning curve, but we can all
that's
learn to
true.
use the plastic apron.
There you go. There you go. That's an important role though, right?
That's
Like we
right.
need clean dishes. So
That's
yeah,
right.
that's cool. So where are people joining us from, and have we heard about anybody's first jobs besides our exciting babysitting and dishwasher history?
We haven't heard anybody's first jobs yet. We do
Oh,
have Alejandro joining us from Oslo. We've got Suzanne joining us from Hartford.
ah,
Um, but people are pretty quiet in the chat so
all
far.
right.
So don't be afraid to say hi.
Well, somebody just told me today was a full moon, apparently, and so we should expect the unexpected. And I was like, well, why tell me that in 2020? Like, is
Yeah.
it really about the moon phases, or is it just, you know, where we are today?
I think in 2020, the unexpected is a day where just nothing happens.
That's true. That's true. That's a good way to
Um,
think about it.
Alejandro has chimed in. Alejandro's first job was selling custom-made cool paper airplanes at the age of 7 at school.
That's
I, w-
totally great.
I wish I went to your school, Alejandro. That's awesome. I would have bought a lot of those.
Yep. Yep. Well, and how entrepreneurial at 7 years
Yeah,
old to do that. That's pretty cool.
yeah. Suzanne was also a babysitter. You
There you
guys could
go.
talk. Gabriella's first job was at the Disney College program.
Mm,
That's very interesting.
that is. I bet you learned a lot there.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I
Cool.
was
And Saptarshi is here as well. Hey, Saptarshi,
hey.
joining us on YouTube.
Oh, good to see you again. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. And we are exploring today the idea of applying customer experience into other industries like B2B, healthcare, professional services. And the reason is because I hear a lot from different organizations who say, like, well, this doesn't really apply to me because I'm B2B or I'm in healthcare or manufacturing or all these different industries. And I really believe that we can apply these ideas to all of these different industries. So why don't I go ahead and jump in and get started? And if you have questions, if there are other industries you want me to address, drop those in the Q&A as we get started. But also don't forget, we do this every week. So if you want weekly reminders, you can go to bit.ly slash
Yeah.
CX Weekly for those reminders. And then you can also, we're always looking for your feedback. So at any point, if you want to let us know ideas for the future of what you want us to cover, or just want to give us feedback on how these are going for you, check that out at bit.ly slash let Jeannie know. And I always say Jeannie with two N's, but you guys know that. So I shouldn't have to say that anymore. But I still say it because that's my life. I have to say it. So anything else before we get started? Let's go ahead and jump in. So feel free to use that chat to ask questions as we go, and to also, communicate as you guys do with each other. We have a great community here, and it's always fun to see you help one another as well. But for those of us who are in B2B, we hear something a lot. We hear that we don't have the same needs. Our customers aren't the same. They're companies, things like that. We've been told to think about customer experience differently, not just for B2B, but for these other industries as well. So we say things like they are not individuals, they're not customers in the traditional sense. They aren't making these decisions for themselves. Sometimes we have to go through committees, we have to build consensus, do all of these different things. And frankly, they don't always want what we're selling. They just might need it instead. And so what that means is that we have to approach this a little bit differently. And, let's face it, it's not always as glamorous to be selling parts, or selling a service, or selling things that are necessary but not really fun. It's not the latest Apple gadget. It's not the latest sneakers that somebody saved up for. It's just different. We're not selling those shiny devices or things like that. So, what people are buying, they are buying systems and parts and consulting and medicine or devices or all of these different things that are necessary, but they are different. It's not the same as selling B2C. So, the bottom line is this: whether we are in B2B or B2C, our customers are human. And even if we think our customers are companies, that might be true. Your clients might be companies, but your customers are still human. And we can't really forget that, because even if we're building that consensus, even if we have to go through committee, those decisions are still being made based on emotion, because that's how human beings operate. We make decisions based on emotion. We also debate the value of things before, during, and right after the sale. So what that means is that we are weighing the cost benefit in both a rational way and an irrational way, even if we are technically a business or a corporate leader or a company owner or any of those things. But the bottom line is also that people get disappointed when you don't live up to the promises you made. So if your product or if your service says, we're going to make your life easier, we're going to make your business operate better, and then the experience doesn't back that up, that's breaking a promise to your customers. So let's break these down in a more granular way as we move forward. So let's talk about applying CX to your industry. And what I did, and there's a blog out there on this on the site at experienceinvestigators.com, but what I did was really tackle 4 different industries that I see this happen a lot. One is just generic B2B, business to business. Those operators who think, well, yeah, our clients are companies, so it's very different. The second is healthcare. The third is professional services, and that includes like accounting firms and legal and folks like that. And manufacturing. I have seen a lot of momentum around manufacturing in the last couple of years. They're starting to realize that they need to provide a customer experience that is more like a B2C experience than before. So, in each of these cases, we are looking at what are the best practices around customer experience. And B2C tends to be a little further ahead on this. They are more advanced in their maturity, they have more best practices in place. So, we can learn from them for sure. Are there limitations in these different industries? Absolutely. So I'm not saying that it's totally the same. What I'm saying is we can still take those best practices and apply them the best way we can to these industries that are not traditionally B2C. So when it comes to B2B, business to business, I hear this all the time. A lot of times when I'm speaking, somebody will come up to me after I speak and say, "This is all great, but you know what? I'm B2B." Or they have perceptions about their customers in B2B. And they say things like, "Well, our customers love us. They will never leave us. They know that we're the best provider for them." And that might be true today, but as you may have heard me say before, customers are loyal until they're not. Customers are loyal until they're not because they might believe that right now. They might believe that you are the best provider, but disruption can still happen in B2B. You could have somebody come out of the woodwork and provide your service in a better, more convenient, more customer focused way and be completely disrupted. And so when we look at B2B, I want you to remember that customers, as well as your clients, the companies, but the customers, they want things to be easier. And in fact, Gartner reported that 77% of B2B customers said their last transaction was difficult. Their last purchase was difficult. This is very common. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think that we overcomplicate B2B purchasing. We make our customers jump through hoops just to get approved for our systems and things like that. It becomes very burdensome on the customer. They still don't want that, even if they're B2B, even if they're companies instead of people, because the people are the ones running the companies. They want to know who to call. We often, when we do journey mapping with B2B organizations, one of the things I see over and over again is that the customer experience is not really based on the journey that they want or even the journey that they actually have. The customer experience is based on the org chart of the business providing the service. We say things like, well, we're going to move them from sales to account management, or we're going to give them an onboarding team who's going to be right there with them for the first 6 months. And then they're kind of on their own, right? We move on. So we have to really think about who can they call and how can we provide them with ease of knowing who to call. We hear this over and over with B2B customers. They start with a salesperson, they build up rapport and trust, and then that person moves on and they still are calling that person because that's who they know. So we have to think about that from the customer's perspective. And you know what? They like B2C conveniences. Even though they are customers in a company, they are customers in their real life too. So they know what Amazon does. They know what it's like to book things online for travel and see the reviews and build trust that way. They understand what all of those experiences are like, and they want that from B2B experiences as well. So we can't assume that just because they happen to play a role in a company, that that's who they are. They're still a full person who is a customer in their real life, and they're living in the real world with the rest of us. So they understand those B2C like conveniences. So let's talk about healthcare. Healthcare is another one that comes up a lot because while patient experience is growing as far as an industry, as far as attention, as far as people really understanding why it's so important, a lot of medical professionals, a lot of organizations that do things like sell medical devices or insurance, health insurance, they still kind of think of these as different animals. So they think of, providing excellent clinical care, and that's how they can provide the best patient experience. And yes, that is super important. But when you look at how patients are rating their experiences, it's based on things like convenience and wait time and disorganization of the office. They report these things. So patients absolutely want convenience. And this comes up over and over and over again. And according to health grades, this is one of the top things that patients want is convenience. We've all had those situations where we call a doctor's office and have to wait by the phone for the call back because heaven forbid you miss it, you can't actually find a different way to communicate, even though we'd be comfortable communicating over email, things like that. A lot of progress has been made on this in 2020. There are more video visits this year than there ever have been in the past. Patients and doctors are becoming a lot more comfortable with telehealth. So there are some moves in the right direction around convenience, but we have to remember what convenience really means to customers. We have to understand their journey as patients. And customers are sick of waiting for doctors. 40% of patients reported that they would switch doctors based on wait times. We want to be respected for our time, for our money, for all of those things. And again, when this comes up, sometimes there's a defensive nature of, yeah, but if they're getting great clinical care, how can you address that? There are some exceptions, and patients are willing to wait for great clinical care if it's not all the time. When you see a pattern where you make an appointment, you show up on time, and then every single time you're waiting 90 minutes plus, then that's not something that's an anomaly. That's a pattern. That's how that doctor operates. That's what patients are reporting getting very frustrated with. They want their time respected as well. And healthcare providers are now publicly reviewed. And if you look at some of those reviews, many parts of those critical reviews are around the front office, are around how is their experience before they go see the doctor or after they go see the doctor. So the actual clinical experience might be handled really well, but it's everything that's surrounding that patients are reporting as critical. So we need to start looking at what is the actual patient journey, not just in a doctor's office or a hospital, but also how does the ecosystem work? What are we asking patients to really understand before they come in? And how can we prepare them for things like healthcare billing and things that come after the fact that can cause a lot of confusion as well? And then professional services is another one that I think has a long way to go here, frankly, because there's been a very long tradition in some of these industries to treat customers a certain way and treat the experts a certain way, right? And so the reason that customers are there in the first place is because they are seeking expertise. So we respect that. We understand that this person has an expertise that I don't. I need an accountant in my life, right? I need a lawyer in my life. I need these different people. So clients report, though, that they often feel talked down to because they don't have that expertise. So terms are thrown around, acronyms are tossed around. They might be told that's not the way it works. And that's the whole reason that they're a customer and a client. So professional services, I think, could really look at this and understand the customer's journey in a different way and try to make it easier and more accessible for the customer, because otherwise it creates this adversarial relationship. It creates a challenging relationship instead of saying, I'm here to guide you. I'm going to help you. Here's what we're going to do together. And billing is one of the top complaints about this industry because it's often treated as kind of an afterthought, like, oh, yeah, we'll send you a bill, we'll take care of it. And the fees aren't even discussed up front. This isn't, and of course, I'm generalizing, this is not true for every single professional service firm, but this is a trend that we have seen. And one is that the fees are treated as an afterthought. And so the client then is kind of surprised by the bill, or they don't understand what exactly they're being billed for because they are sometimes surprised that, oh, I just called with a question and I got a bill from my attorney. Now that might be, the way it's done. That's fine, but we need to be more proactive about explaining that and not assume that the customer understands how things are done moving forward. And in some cases, proactive communication is discouraged because if you're an attorney or an accountant or different people who actually charge for your time, if you call and talk to the customer, that can actually lead to billing. So they're kind of discouraged from proactive communication. What this does is it actually creates this huge chasm between any time that the customer has a real need and they actually reach out and say, I need help, and the next time that they need that help. There can be months, years even between any communication between the professional services provider and the customer. And that leads to this feeling of, not really knowing what's going on, feeling disconnected, feeling like maybe there's chipping away at trust, all of those things. So professional services, as a rule, I think proactive communication can be a really good thing that they're not taking advantage of, and really understanding the customer's perspective and how to help them in a more proactive way. That could go so far towards the customer experience. And then finally, I wanted to talk about manufacturing because this is another one where I hear over and over, like, this is not something that we need to worry about because we're providing parts to other manufacturers who build the next big thing. But again, they are still people in those firms, and they absolutely do care about the experience. And a lot of times they are frustrated because the manufacturer doesn't really understand their business. So they don't understand that if there are delays to delivery of something, then that can create a huge problem for the client company, because they might have delays on their end. If they're making promises about building things, then they need to understand what the expectations are. So setting expectations around timing and delivery, this is an area where manufacturing still has a long way to go. And the ones who do this right, their customers absolutely appreciate it and give them repeat business over and over and over. And you know what? Customers are often asked to figure out so many systems with manufacturing. They are told, like, great, we're going to get this to you first. You need to fill out our product spec uh, format. You can tell I don't know what I'm talking about a little bit, but you can tell that there are, especially in construction and things like that, there are a lot of hoops to go through here. And with manufacturing, the same thing. We need to know your specs. You need to do it in our format over here. Oh, you also need to sign up for a billing system over here. Oh, by the way, we need all of your end user information over here. And there are all these different systems that it's up to the customer to really figure out. It can be very cumbersome, and it's something that manufacturers need to start realizing. We need to streamline that. We need to take away the effort from our customers and at least take that burden on instead of forcing them to fill everything out. And, I've found that customers rely on 1 to 2 people at the manufacturer. They say, "Well, I'll just call my guy Jim, and he's gonna take care of this for me." And if Jim walks out the door, then you've lost that relationship. So the customer experience has to be something that's sustainable, repeatable, and consistent. And if it's not, if you find yourself looking and thinking, "Well, this customer has a great relationship because of that one sales guy," then that's not consistent. That's something that's based on that one person, and talent can walk out the door at any point. So really evaluate your customer experience with that critical eye to see if you have some of these pitfalls that are going on. There are many, many others, of course, but I just wanted to hit the highlights. But essentially, the goal here is thinking about, how does customer experience matter in every industry? And I really believe it matters. And I believe it matters because customers are people. And as you guys have heard me understand, or heard me say this before, we need to understand and improve and innovate around the customer experience. Because guess what? If we do that, if we serve people better, we actually are making their days better. We are helping them as people, not just as organizations. But if we do this well, it also reflects back on our organization with increased referrals, increased retention, increased renewal rates, all the things that these B2B professional services, healthcare, all of these organizations care about. If we focus on customer experience, we can deliver on those results and have success that way too. So your customers are human and they need your attention, even if we think our clients are companies, or even if we think that we're doing the best we can because we're delivering in that moment, but we're ignoring the rest of the journey. We have to stop doing that. We have to start really looking at the end-to-end journey for every customer in every industry. In my humble opinion, that's what I think we should do. So I'm curious about you guys. What are the unique CX challenges that you're seeing? What do you think about all of this? Do you apply customer experience within your industry? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? And then, of course, we're also interested in your questions. So let us know. Any questions come in, David?
Well, let's give folks a chance to type out their questions and comments, and kick off with a question that came in from email this week.
Great.
So the question is, are there general questions to ask to figure out how to apply CX across any industry? Is it as simple as asking what customers expect and then trying to fulfill that, or are there other ways to narrow it down further?
Great question. And I would refer actually to something we've been talking about a lot here, which is, how do you define success? If you don't know what success looks like for your customer experience, then it's really hard to give direction and provide the right feedback to employees to deliver on that. So we have the CX success statement workbook, which is always a challenge to say. But if you like alliteration, there it is. And that is a free downloadable that you can use to help you define success. That applies in all of these industries too. So that's one thing I would say. The other is, do you know your customer experience mission? Do you actually have that? Do you know your customer? Do you have your customer really defined? Do you have personas developed or different segments or things like that? All of those tools that we use in customer experience, if you don't have any of those, it's really hard to say, "Oh yeah, how are we doing? Looks like we're doing pretty well." So those are the questions I would start with. And then I would also look at feedback that you do have if you've done any surveys, if you have any feedback from what your salespeople tell you, what your service people tell you, who is really happy and who's not, and look at the differences and try to figure out what is consistent that we can start applying as far as best practices across the organization, across the journey. But you have to start with that foundation because otherwise it gets really easy to get into the weeds and the tactics. And then you could spend a lot of effort on that for a year and still not really know if you're successful with progress. So start with defining, what does success look like to you?
That's great. Let's go to a question from Alejandro. He asks, any tips or
Mm,
tricks to get back customers who we've failed in our promises?
I love this question. Thank you
Mhm.
for asking this. Yeah. I mean, number one, this is so basic and might seem really obvious, but number one is call them and say, hey, we know we disappointed you. We want to make this experience better for other people. Ask them for an exit interview. Ask them for feedback that you can share with your board, with your leadership team. Let them feel heard because a lot of times what happens in these relationships is they start very strong in the sales journey and even in the onboarding journey. And then what happens is people start feeling neglected. They feel like, well, I'm not the shiny new thing anymore. And so I haven't heard from them in a while. Just that outreach could let them know we feel we're listening, we're really trying. I would also say look at how you broke the promise and see if you can close that loop. Sometimes people really do just want to hear, we're really sorry that happened, and we're going to make sure this never happens again. Uh, I think we often don't want to apologize in business, and I disagree with that. I think apologizing is very important because we as people want to hear that. We want to hear somebody say, "You know what? This that was rotten and that shouldn't have happened and we're sorry about that." You know what? That the fact that this is delayed a second time is unacceptable. And I'm going to own that for you and figure out what we can do next time. And so words like that matter. And then turning those words into action matters even more. So if you make a promise about resolution, follow up and say, you know what? Thank you so much for the exit interview. I just wanted you to know that we changed a process because of what you told us. Or we are committed now to letting people know about a delay, 3 days, 3 months in advance instead of 3 days or whatever you can actually promise. So, looking at ways that you can resolve small things can go a long way towards building up that trust again and making sure they know that they're heard and that they are, that you're owning it, that you understand that you broke that promise. That can go a long way.
Let's jump to a question, or sorry, a comment from Saptarshi that I think brings up a good point. Saptarshi says, it's difficult to change leaders' minds when it comes to applying CX because they're focused on revenue
Mhm.
instead of the actual customer experience. But I think it's really easy to try to connect those dots because customer experience directly ties to revenue, doesn't it?
It does, David. I love that. I love that you're speaking like a CX, evangelist now. It's awesome. Um,
I've been
yeah.
hanging out with you too much.
Yeah, that was really the whole goal of that workbook that we put together was helping people connect those dots between, it's not just a nice to have. Customer experience is not just something that we should do because it's the right thing to do, even though I believe that as well. But we have to connect those to the business outcomes. So, what does it mean if we improve the customer experience? What does it mean if we can get a lift in retention or renewal of 1%? In some organizations, 1% can mean millions of dollars. So if we look at it that way, it becomes a lot more apparent that, you know what, if you want revenue, leader, guess what? I've got the formula for you. If we invest in this way, if we make sure that we're making progress, then that's going to happen. The other side of that coin is talking about loss, talking about pain. So one of the ways that I have sometimes gotten through to people is saying, you know what? Look at the disruptors of the last 10, 20 years. They've all been focused on experience, all of them. And so if we are sitting around waiting for a disruption, we're doing a good job, because if that's the status quo, somebody will disrupt. I mean, look at some of these industries in, excuse me, what we're talking about. There are disruptors out there. There are organizations that are solely focused on disrupting, for instance, how people are paid in their organizations. Something so basic and simple. There are disruptors out there. So there are people who are looking at, how can we throw you out of the market? How can we take over your customers? And if you start looking at it that way, it provides a little more urgency around innovating around the customer experience to deliver the best for your customers.
I also just want to point out one more comment from Saptarshi. Last week, Saptarshi had mentioned that he's trying to be a change agent in CX. And today, in another comment, Saptarshi, you said, I am a change agent. And I love that.
Ah,
I love that.
yay.
So,
Yes.
yes.
Fantastic.
Let's jump to another comment. This one's from Ahmad. Good to see you, Ahmad. He's just sharing his experience. He worked at a large retail company in the Middle East, and they tried on individual salespeople in B2B. And as soon as those folks left, the company lost the customers. I've
Yep.
had that exact same experience in my previous corporate life as well.
Yeah. It's very, very common. And I think sometimes we don't realize how much culture has a part in that, because if you have a culture where it's really about, everybody for themselves, what happens is you have these people in the organizations who build great relationships with customers, and they don't want to share any of that information. They don't share what they're doing. The best practices are lost with them. So if you create a culture where you're like, let's figure out how can we best serve customers, and let's all define success in the right way and understand what that means, then you have people who say, you know what, I did this with my customers and it worked. I think it's something everybody could do. You find those consistent and sustainable ways, those best practices to serve your customers. So I think it's something that is constantly overlooked. There's lots of talk, especially here in the United States, but elsewhere as well, about the talent shortage, right? You invest in people in your organization, you train them, you get them. And then when they walk out, that's a lot of money walking out the door, no matter what, because they have skills that then you have to train somebody else on. I think what we need to do is figure out what is the formula about what customers go with them, because I think that's something that is totally overlooked in a lot of organizations. And it's a strong case for making a customer experience exactly what it is, a mindset, a strategy, and a business discipline, not something that is an afterthought to your organization.
We've got so many really great comments in the chat today. Jeannie, we talk a lot, you talk a lot about creating a story, sharing customer feedback from a storytelling perspective. It's part of the SMRC checklist. So I want to share this comment from Tammy, who works in manufacturing. She says, the turning point for us in our digital and CX transformation was sharing negative comments from customers on their parts buying experience. We were able to tie that to the CX transformation to the ownership experience, and this made all the difference.
Yes, that's great, Tammy. And that's a great reminder of how powerful that can be, because sharing comments, sharing real stories, that moves people. And it also forces them to get out of the inside out mindset, because I've worked with a lot of organizations where the first workshop we have where I'm talking about, what happens to the customer at this point, you can tell in the culture when there's finger pointing and they say, well, then it goes into the billing department and they have that whole system and customers hate it and blah, blah, blah. But everybody's kind of shrugging, saying that's the way it is. The minute you start saying, I interviewed customers and they told me that this was super painful and these are their words, suddenly everybody can see that this is really what we're here for. This is about the customer. It's not about the blame game. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about delivering for that customer. And so it's a great reminder. Thank you so much for bringing that up because it's so critical to get people on board with those ideas and stories and customer quotes and things that are very human. That's what moves people's hearts. And sometimes that's where we have to start. We have to get out of our heads a little bit, stop talking about metrics and things that are a little abstract, and start telling those real stories and connect human to human. This is what's happening. So thank you for that.
All right, let's get to a question. Christopher asks, as we see the value customers seek move beyond transactional experiences, which are becoming more and more expected, and move more towards companies making positive societal impacts, what measures indicate companies are making progress? How do we measure that?
Oh boy.
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. I love that you say making positive societal experience. Um, I think this is another area where you kind of have to define that success before you can measure it. You have to figure out, what does that look like? What does that mean? And I think there are so many great examples of organizations right now that are stepping up in this way. And they are starting to define things differently. They are starting to figure out, it's one thing to say that we are a good corporate citizen, a good part of our community. How does that really show up? What are the actions and behaviors that we need to commit to and report back on and be accountable? So I think that's one way, is to really define that in real terms and be very transparent about it. I think that's very, very important as well. But it depends a lot on the industry, on the community, on all of those different things. So that's how I would answer it today. I might answer it differently next week if I think about it a little more, but I think that's how I'd answer that today. But it's a great question. I think it's something that we are all really looking at our roles as leaders differently. And my hope is that all leaders are doing that, are really understanding that this is not about those transactions that you pointed out. This is about something bigger than not only ourselves and our organizations, but it's bigger than that. This is about kind of humanity as a whole. And I think we can get pretty excited about that, but we also need to go beyond the platitudes, and we need to define what are the steps that we're taking and how do we measure that success.
We've got another good question from Christopher that I want to get to in just a second. But first, let's jump ahead to a comment from Nick, which I think ties in really well to a question that came in from email. So Nick says, healthcare needs a lot of reforms. Patient experience is extremely important from the business side and from the health and wellness side. So I think that leads into an email question that I want to share here. And that question is from someone who works in healthcare and asks, they say, a lot of the things that patient wants are what practitioners want as well, shorter wait times, for example. But when reality gets in the way, time per patient is increasing, safety taking priority over convenience, etc.
Mhm.
Are there ways to at least help patients understand the reality of the situation? We're not trying to make things harder for them on purpose.
Yep. I love this question because it's so true. Uh, so any woman who's had a baby, and I've had two, understands that you have all these appointments, right, with your doctor. But every so often, that doctor has to go deliver a baby. And babies don't have a schedule. They don't tell you when they're going to arrive all the time. So there are times where there is disruption in everybody's schedule because the very doctor that you want when you are delivering your baby is delivering somebody else's baby. Seems like a fair trade-off. The difference is there are doctors who just let people kind of line up in the waiting room, don't really communicate what's happening, and then just lead to frustrating experiences where sometimes they have to say, "Oh, we couldn't fit you in today. You're going to have to come back." That is not a customer-focused experience in healthcare. What my doctor's front office used to do is call me and say, "This is the situation. This is what we're expecting. We'll call you either way if it's going to be early or late." Because you know what else? Babies sometimes take an hour to deliver and sometimes 72. You just don't know. And so there are situations like that where it's about that proactive communication. It's about setting those expectations. Now, I've had situations where I have been more than patient and more than happy to wait if I know about a situation like that. I think the frustration comes when, first of all, it's not acknowledged, when you might be sitting in a room by yourself for 30 minutes plus, and the doctor walks in like, no big deal. That tells me something. That tells me that that doctor is not really looking at this from my perspective. They're not acknowledging that there's a delay, that they've made me wait, all of those things. The other part of this is around looking at the end to end journey. How easy is it to set an appointment? How easy is it to pay a bill? How much communication do you get about the next steps that need to be taken? I mean, healthcare is complex. Patient experience is super complex and individual, and we need to understand that there is tons of nuance there. I totally get that. But I also know that there are certain things we can do that are these best practices around customer experience. We can set better expectations. We can own up when those expectations are shifting. We can proactively communicate. All of those things can still be applied to healthcare. So I totally hear what that question was asking about. We want the same thing. How do we get there? Some of this is outside of that clinical care. It's about the rest of the experience, the rest of the journey.
Beautifully answered. Let's get to that next question from Christopher. So Christopher says, putting aside embedding culture to sustain customer centricity takes far longer than putting in place the right processes to deliver improved experiences. So I love questions that are like, if you only had one, if you could only choose one. So if you only had one idea you could implement to demonstrate the
Mm.
potential of customer experience, what would you do?
Oh my goodness, Christopher. You are asking some deep questions today. So yeah, I think the one thing, gosh, I know you're going to hate this, but I'm going to say it depends a little because it depends on where you are in the customer experience journey. So if this is something where nobody's ever really talked about it and somebody says, "What should we do around customer experience?" I really like starting with understanding because there is something very powerful about saying to leaders, I know this is what you think is happening, but this is what's actually happening. Because if we have internally focused process maps and systems and things like that, and we think they're all working perfectly, there's probably something there that you already know about that customers don't like or customers are struggling with, or you take the initiative to understand the customer experience. So that can be done through customer journey mapping, through customer interviews, through feedback, all of these different ways. But I would say that's really the first step because otherwise, how do you know what to improve? How do you really know where you should prioritize the innovation and the improvements that you need to make? So that's one thing I would say. I would also say taking one step further back, if you have not yet defined customer experience success in your organization, then it's really hard to say what progress is. So taking the time to define that for your organization, for your year, for your goals, whatever it is, that can go a long way too, because then people start getting it in your organization. They go, oh, aha, if we invest in this, if we see our NPS go up, then that actually means our renewal rates will go up. That means we can save money and get revenue. That's something we can all get on board with. So sometimes that's how you can kind of move things along as well. But understanding the customer experience is always one of the ways that can really get people on board with why it's important and why it's time to stop making assumptions about it. And there are like 99 others I want to say, but I'm not going to.
Ah, let's go to a really broad question that I think you could also probably answer with 100 answers. This one comes from Nick. What drives
Oof.
customer loyalty?
Awesome, awesome question. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it has like a zillion answers, but I will say that loyalty is an emotional connection. Loyalty is something that happens when customers feel like, you know what, they have a stake in this relationship as well, and it means something to them. And that's different than satisfaction, let's say, because satisfaction means, yep, you delivered exactly what you said you would deliver. Not anything more, not anything that moved me emotionally, but yeah, I'm satisfied, sure. Those are very different experiences. And so when we're aiming for loyalty, we need to really look at how are we providing those emotional connections for our customers? How are we exceeding their expectations? And bottom line, how are we understanding what they really need? Because sometimes we assume loyalty. We say, well, they've shopped here for years. Why would they stop shopping here? But really, they've shopped there for years because it was convenient, because it was around the corner. And if they maybe get a different place to live a couple blocks away, they won't make the effort to go back to that store. That's not loyalty. That's satisfaction with the convenience of it, but that's it. So that's what I think drives loyalty are these emotional connections, these meaningful moments that really build up trust and build up that feeling of, you know what, I'm into this brand so much that I'm part of it now. Like I believe in who they are, what they deliver, and they show up for me the same way every time. I think we often ignore that too in customer experience. How do we show up for our customers along the way consistently and in a way that builds trust? And that's the difference between saying somebody is satisfied or loyal. Oh, we can't hear you, David. You're muted.
Oh, I almost made it through the whole meeting
Almost.
without
We were so close.
almost. Um, I want to get a chance to talk about what we've got planned for CX Day
Oh,
and
yeah.
CX Year, but let's close with one more comment. And I love this one. I think that it's worth remembering every day.
Mhm.
It takes more to get a customer back than to keep them, and word of mouth can be your best and worst marketing.
Well said. Well said. That is perfect. Yes, it's so true. And I think we often are asked as CX professionals to focus on the metrics and focus on the measurement and all those things. But bottom line, that's what it's all about, right? Like we need to provide experiences that people talk about in the right way and refer others to. And if we don't do that, the other side of that coin is pretty ugly. So there's that too. But yes, thank you guys for being here. Um, David, do you want to tee us up for CX Day?
Yeah, so we've got some big things planned for CX Day. First of all, Jeannie, you'll be sharing a little mini keynote.
Hmm.
So that will be available. That will go live Tuesday morning. CX Day, if you don't know, is this coming Tuesday, October 6th. It's a chance for all of us to. Do you want to speak, Jeannie, to
Sure.
what makes CX Day so special?
Yeah, CX Day has been around. I think this is the eighth or ninth year. I think where the CXPA, the Customer Experience Professionals Association, which I'm a proud member, we a couple years ago decided that this is about celebrating CX professionals and also helping them really share the power of customer experience within their organizations and their communities. And so this year, we're launching a mini keynote, as David mentioned. I will be sharing some of what's most important about customer experience. And also, we've got a little surprise that we're going to announce then, too. So that's something to look forward to as well. We have something that we think will be really helpful to you guys. And we're going to announce that on CX Day through that keynote and through some other channels. So keep your eyes open for that. There will be a blog, and then next week, the webinar will be focused on some of those things as well.
And next week's webinar will be pre-recorded, if I'm not mistaken. It'll be another
That's right.
pre-recorded one, but it'll go live on Friday at the same time. And Jeannie, I'm ready. I'm ready to tell folks if people are on this call and have made it this far, I'm ready to tell them about what we've got planned for Tuesday. If you are,
All right. All right. Let's do it.
all
Let's do
right.
it.
So here's the URL. It's
Yep.
Year of CX. And so Jeannie and I were talking about this, and we were thinking about how CX Day is so wonderful about getting people motivated and getting people on the same page and talking about customer experience. But like everything else, life moves so fast, it becomes easy to move on to the next thing and let this drop off. So we want to try to solve that, and we're doing that with a year of
Mhm.
customer experience. So, what we'll be doing is twice monthly, we will be releasing new free resources. Things like the Smirk checklist, which we've got coming out, that'll be ready on Tuesday. Things like the CX success statement workbook, which is ready now, in fact.
Mhm.
And so we'll be creating new tools for you to use with your team and releasing those to you for free. And you can learn more and sign up at Year of CX.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea here was that we keep hearing from people about, what can we do? What are some of the options available? So this is really just providing free resources, free tools for you throughout the year. Every 2 weeks, we're going to have something. You can sign up at Year of CX, and there you can also sign up for our newsletter and some other things. But if not, you can still just sign up for those deliverables every 2 weeks. So if you have ideas on things that you'd like to see, please let us know. We have a lot of great stuff coming up in the next few weeks and the next few months. I'm really excited about it. I think it's something that hopefully will help this community continue to serve customers in the best possible way. And as you guys know, my mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And so, you doing this, you serving your customers, you learning, you showing up every week, that's helping me live my mission. So, I want to thank you again for that and for being here. And, it's an exciting time. Next week is also Customer Service Week and CX Day. And now we're launching Year of CX. I mean, this is incredible. What a fourth quarter. So thank you guys all so much for being here. It's always my pleasure. Thank you, David, for all you do and for tracking everything when I'm not. And as always, we love your feedback, bit.ly/let Jeannie know.
Mhm.
And we will be pre-recorded next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks live. And, we love hearing from you. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter, all these other places. And thank you for all you do. Have a great weekend. Have a great customer service week and a fantastic CX day. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.